I always enjoy lecturing on this topic, which is how to encrypt passwords and save them in a database. Of course, when you're a new developer and you're learning how to do a login system for the first time, it makes intuitive sense that your passwords have to be encrypted. However, the ability to do that might seem really hard. And thankfully, with the tools that are out there, it's made it not so difficult. And so the tool that we're going to bring in to our Express application is called Bcrypt. And, suffice to say, it's going to take a password, unencrypted password, and store it in the database in an encrypted format that's not plain text for the users to read. Right now in the state of our application, we have basically strings in our password. And again, that's not obviously what we want to do. If I look at my users, we're just storing regular old strings out there, and that's not what we want. So we're going to bring in Bcrypt. We're going to install Bcrypt in our Express application. And so if you bring up a terminal window, if you kind of see our Express app isn't all that fancy right now, very boilerplate Express app, but we do have a user module. And eventually we have a React front end that we're going to start working with, but we're going to use PostMan as our front end to test these routes. And so in our user module, we can list all of our users, we can get a user by ID, we can update a user by their ID. And again, we kind of have this in working in PostMan and hitting our Mongo database, so that if I were to open up a terminal and and start up my Express server, of course we can list all of our users and the like, and that's where the application is. And we're going to be adding a register user and a login user. This is a update user by ID, but the point of me opening up PostMan is for me to list all my users and get my users back out of the database. And so that's the current state. And I'm going to start by creating a database function. I just got a database file here where I'm going to add a user to my database. So maybe add user to database, and kind of let the magic of GitHub Copilot template this out for me. Make a function called add user, accept the user, connect to my database, insert one. Okay, now that's all good except for we're not hashing anything. Again, a hash is taking something unsecure and turning it into something secure. So we're going to install that Bcrypt. And then we get to bring in Bcrypt wherever we choose. Maybe we can bring it in the database module or the user module. I'll go ahead and bring it in on the user module. So I'm going to import Bcrypt from Bcrypt. Now I do believe it is just Bcrypt. Now it wants me to fill it in Bcrypt.js, but I don't think that's right. So let's go ahead and write our route. So how about an add user route? And this route has to accept a user object from rec.body. So in PostMan, we'll send a username and a password and an email from the URL encoded, basically our body right here. Again, we'll mimic a front end. And so const user equals rec.body. So this is our user from the front end, okay, that is registering, right? So this is a user who wants to register from the front end. This is very simply how we can now hash the password. We're going to take that plain text password and hash it. So let's see. I do user.password equals await. So there's actually two arguments here. You can see this is a function called hash. We're calling this bcrypt, bcrypt.hash. It takes in an unencrypted password and what's called a number of salt rounds. This is now salt rounds are going to make it harder for a hacker to hack. So you can kind of you could see here, if I'm looking at the description in blue, salt rounds, the salt is to be used in the encryption. If specified as a number, then the salt will be generated with the specified number of rounds used. And so what this can do is make it harder for a hacker to decrypt your password by adding these salt rounds. There's a really good video explanation on what is a salt round. But a salt is this idea of you have a password and then you add a salt to the password. It's just a string. So your password is a string and you add a random string to the end of your password to make your password longer. And that's what a salt is. And when you add salt rounds, it adds a longer string or maybe more iterations of hashing that password. So it makes it harder for the hacker to hack. And so, you know, this is a number and you might wonder, well, why not make it a big number? If I do 1 round, 2 rounds is harder than 1 round. And so, you know, I always kind of use this number 10 because there is a downfall for making salt rounds too big because that can really slow down your application. And so a good kind of middle of the road number is 10 for your number of salt rounds. Again, the TLDR, it makes the hacking of your password out of your database harder if you increase the salt rounds. So, okay, so we now have a password that is stored in a hashed format. We're updating our password property to be this hashed value. I need to export my add user. And now I can import add user from my database module. So now I have this function. It's asynchronous. So now I can put this in a try catch. Okay, and if I try and insert my user, so if we take a look, add user, I want to go back to my database module. I got a DB result. Notice how I'm looking at my result in my database. I'm going to comment out my old debug messages. If I actually get to this result, I want to inspect the result and see if my insert count is 1. Then that means I successfully inserted my user. Otherwise, we're just sending back a 500 error adding user. And if this throws an exception, we're saying error adding user. And so, you know, this basically sets up our front end to hash the password, and let's try and add my user. Let me close my routes here on PostMan, and I'm going to add a request. This is a post/add, so my full route is going back to index /API/user/add, and it's a post method, HTTP localhost 5000 API user add. If I go to body here, let's again look at my database. It's pretty basic: username, email, and password. Username, email, password. Now I might want to do something like make sure the user doesn't exist before I insert them. But let's just do this for now. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's hit that and see if I got the right port or what's happening. Oh, I shut it down, so I have to boot it back up. Run my server. Now I should be able to, it says error adding user. Let's see what's going on. Now, even though it said error adding user, sometimes I doubt this inserted count. So you can see the database result is acknowledged is true. So I actually get an acknowledged of true. So I could do something like if db results dot acknowledged ACKNOW. Okay, that's why I inspect the DB results. I logged it out right here, and then I sent that over here, stored in this DB result object. And so, but if I go to my database, actually, I've got an update. Let me do that later. And refresh, even though I got an error message, you could see it did add my user. I just didn't give the right response from my server. And you can see that my user is in fact with a hashed password. So that's awesome. Let's try it again. And again, I get error adding user. I want to take DB result here, debug user, and I'm going to, instead of putting that there, I'm going to add myself again. And so here it's coming from acknowledged is true. I don't know that I spelled it right. Maybe, let me take off, oh, it's Boolean true. It's not string true. Okay. Try again. Now I'm getting my success message. 200, user added successfully. Awesome. Okay, now, do I want to check if my user email exists? Yeah, I might, like in this case, if I refresh, I've added myself a bunch of times just in troubleshooting. I'm going to delete these old users. I probably don't want that, right? I probably want to say, hey, if that user already exists, maybe give them that message, right? So if I'm going to find my user by my email. So let me go in my database, and I'm going to write a method to get user by email. And again, the magic that is email. Still got to know what you're doing a little bit, because this is okay. So we're going to send in a string email, run a Mongo query to find one email property. No, I'm going to send in a user. That's why it was slowing me down. I'm going to send in a user. Now if I send in, we are hitting the user collection. Again, it is the capital user singular. Find one email property equal to the email that's passed in. And then return user. Let's close that off. Let's export get user by email. So the first thing that I would do here, before I add a new user, we're going to call get user by email, pass in user.email, and then we're only going to, if not existing user, or actually if user, there we go, if existing user is truthy, then we say the user already exists and hit a return. That makes sure to break you out, and so you don't hit anything else. And so now I got to bring in get user by email. Okay, so we'll just add that little feature in so that if we add a user, we see user already exists. It no longer adds my user a bunch of times. And if I go back to my database, I can refresh and you can see there's still just one user, even though I tried to add me twice. Okay, so there is my register a new user. Obviously, we need to talk about data validation. We haven't validated any data at this point, but that will be next week. And so on this new request, I'm just going to call this add new user. Okay, and save that up. And now we need to log in our user. And so with a login route, I'm going to do a router post/login. Okay, now on my login route, we now have a get user by email. So let's read the user. This is going to have a username and a password, so two fields we're looking at here. We're going to see if there's an existing user, and if there's an existing user, we've got the email. Here is where we're going to call bcrypt.compare. And so bcrypt.compare takes an unencrypted password and the existing user's password. Now this is what's coming out of the database. So this password is hashed and this password is unhashed. So we're basically comparing the unhashed password to the hashed password, and we're letting Bcrypt tell us if there's a successful login or not. And so again, this is if there's also no existing user, right, then the user by email address failed. And so then we're also saying login failed. Now I'm going to, I'll definitely critique this. Copilot is crazy good once it figures you out. And but it's far from perfect. That is also true. So we're going to do a post. And we're going to log in. Localhost 5000. API user login. And I'm going to go to body. And I'm going to send in, you got to send in an email and a password. And if I do EA, let's see, I just registered EA Gudmestead at rankin.edu. And a password of 123456. And it does say login successful. If I change my password, login failed. If I change my email address, we get login failed. So again, this is only working in the event that my email and password are exactly as they are when I registered. And we could, in this case, the user email doesn't exist. So instead of saying res status 500, I could say, user email not found. And then, I don't know, please register first. And in this case, the email is good, does not match. And so we can even get some different error messages back. Now it says the password doesn't match. And here, of course, the user email not found. So getting this set up exactly the way you want it. Of course, anytime you're hitting a database method, you probably want to wrap this in a try-catch. That might help your application from crashing. And I think I just added one too many curlies. Might need one more. Okay, so let's put if else in here. That closes the try, that closes the catch. I need one more curly. It is barking at me. It wants, there we go. It wants one more curly. So that catch lines up with that try right there. That curly closes that. There we go. And so that way, if any database exceptions are thrown, we're catching those exceptions. And I should, at some point, refactor this to make sure that all my database calls are wrapped inside of try catches as a best practice. But yeah, that is creating a user authentication with Bcrypt and storing those users in a database.